my body thinks I can still drive. Welcome. So thank you for coming out. Tonight is the first formal get-together for the Neuromuscular Support Group for Young People. And this evening wouldn't be possible without the thinking and the impetus that came from Hannah, who approached Adrian Sexton about doing something for young people with neuromuscular conditions. So Adrian then contacted the Genetic Support Network of Victoria, and we decided that we'd have a go and we'd put something together. Today is the first formal meeting, but it's the start of a momentum that we'd like to progress and we'd like to do something with in the future. So it's only as good as the people and the effort that's put into it, but it really is a place to start this evening, and really it's about having the right conversations and determining what we should be doing in order to support this very underserviced age group. So we've got paediatrics that are very well looked after, we've got mature adults very well looked after, but socially I think it's this sort of age group between 18 and a little bit over 30 that needs a little bit of attention. And with the use of social media and social networking and things like that, there's absolutely no excuse that young people should be feeling isolated. So tonight we have Hannah who's going to speak, we have Adrian who's going to say something, and Paul James who's given us some of his valuable time this evening as well. So I'm just going to get my agenda. So Paul, you're going to be talking about treatment testing and research updates. Yeah? So have you got a presentation?
I have.
You have. Okay. So is it being loaded on? Okay. Great. All right. Without any further ado, I'll introduce, Paul can get started. We are recording tonight's session so that we can put it up online for anybody that wasn't able to come or anyone that would like to listen to this after the event. So if you have an issue, if you're asked a question, I think we can stop, but otherwise, if you're okay with your voice being recorded, we'll just go right through. So thank you and welcome. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks everyone for coming out, and thank you Adrian for asking me to speak, because it's the only possible way I could get to a support group for young people these days. I think Adrian asked me to talk about this because she's just sick of me going on about these kind of things anyway. It may as well be useful to actually speak to other people rather than just banging on about Adrian. So I thought there's a lot of things about the whole area of neurogenetics which are very exciting and which I get excited about. And so what I've just picked are some things which I think are really exciting, because I think the things that are interesting to everybody that you'll find quite interesting. I haven't put in hardcore science, even the slides might look a little bit hardcore, but there's no hardcore science in here. I just wanted to show you kind of what it's like at the moment in the field of neurogenetics and why it's a time when we can all feel really pretty excited about what's going on. So I'm going to focus particularly on information about genes. I'm a geneticist from Royal Melbourne, so I'm very interested in genetic stuff, but also what that means in terms of things like understanding more about the conditions and thinking about treatment, which I guess is really what we really want to know the most about in the future. So just so that kind of this is the let's all start on the same page slide. What are we talking about when we're talking about neurogenetics? Well, obviously it covers every single condition in which the basic problem is the slow loss of nerve cells from somewhere in the nervous system, and that's the defining feature of a neurogenetic condition. And in this case, we're talking about conditions where that slow loss of nerve cells has something to do with something that you inherited, so a genetic change is the fundamental cause. Now, we think about 24,000 different genes, and they used to think there was a lot more than that, but unfortunately, when they started looking at them, the reality was we don't have that many. In fact, an onion has more genes than we do. But despite that, a lot of them, about a third of them, are devoted to our nervous system, and probably any one of those, disruption in any one of those, can produce some sort of features that affect our nervous system. And so there large number of possibilities for neurogenetic conditions. Just to understand a little bit about the terms that are used, when we talk about our nervous system, it goes all the way from our brain, obviously, the vast amount of our nervous system is right up there in our heads, and then we have these nerves spreading down through our spinal cords and out into our peripheries, and problems at any part in that produces a particular type of condition, and often they have their own name. So if we think about our brains, to begin with, at the very top of our brains, our cerebral cortex, where all our hardcore processing goes on, our consciousness and our thinking. If you disrupt that, then what you have is a problem with memory and learning and cognition, that's dementia. But if you then go down, you can have all sorts of other conditions, quite a number of people with neurodegenerative conditions, it affects their cerebellum, and that's a part at the back of the brain which controls coordination, and the result is a condition called ataxia, which is just the opposite of that, it's incoordination. And so there's a whole group of spinal cerebellar ataxias, scars, and that's makes it quite a big group of neurogenetic conditions. Going further down, if it involves the nerves in your spine, then you can have problems with the strength of your muscles because those signals are not getting through. And there's a number of conditions there. Motor neuron disease is probably the best known one, especially at the moment with everyone putting ice buckets on their heads. But also there's hereditary spastic paraplegia, it's another group of those motor neuron type conditions, and spinal muscular atrophy, which is something which will be more familiar to the people at the Children's Hospital than it is to us down at the adult hospital, because that's usually a paediatric condition. So all of these conditions have their own name. A lot of them are named after a patient or a doctor, so a lot of autonomous names which are all very confusing, or what we try to do is describe them in one word, so we make these very long words which have got lots of different components that tell us what's wrong. But each of them really has the same problem. It's the slow loss of nerve cells from some part of the nervous system, and the underlying cause is genetic. This is a few years ago when I was doing laboratory science, before the laboratories worked out that I was probably better off in the clinic. This is the kind of hint pattern that we had. We're talking about these are different motor neuron diseases, and these were the genes that were known. So about 10 years ago, this would have been the picture of what motor nerve neurogenetics look like. Lots of 3 different conditions, but in fact only 4 genes that we knew about, and most people we didn't know what the genetic cause for their condition was. By the time they thought to throw me out of the laboratory, it looked more like this. So lots of different genes have been discovered, and also the conditions themselves have started to merge together. So instead of saying, oh, this person has spinal muscular atrophy, but this person over here, they don't have that, they have something else, we realised that in fact a lot of the genes caused a number of different problems, and the conditions weren't nearly as distinct as we used to think they are. So now we think in much more broad terms about problems with nerve loss in the nervous system, and we also know that there's lots of different genes, and the same genes can cause lots of different problems. So this is the big progress in the area. The first sort of big thing is that there are just lots more genes, and these days the chance that whatever a person, whatever they present with, whatever their particular problem, the chance that we could understand what that gene is a lot better than it used to be. It used to be we'd have to be very lucky. Now we only have to be reasonably lucky in order to find out what the particular gene is. Helping with that is another really big change, and this is the new testing technology. And if you've been along to a neurogenetic clinic, you might well have heard people talking about this, because it's been such a big change for us in the genetic field that we talk about it a lot. And this is this thing called next generation sequencing. And it's a bit of a silly name, because what happens when we get to the next generation, after the next generation, we're going to call it next generation sequencing. So it does have other names, they call it massively parallel sequencing, and I'll show you why that is. But next generation sequencing it's very simple to sum it up. It's just a lot better sequencing than we've ever had before. So in the old days, our sequencing used to be a little bit like this. Oops. Where we'd take one little bit that we were interested in, we would copy it up, we'd stick it in our machines, and we'd sequence it. And then if it wasn't that bit, we had to go right back to the beginning and start again. And so you just had to go round and round, copying little bits of DNA and sequencing them until you found the piece that you're interested in. And this took a really long time, it was very laborious. And so now, what we have, next generation sequencing, what we do is we take all the DNA, we break it up into tiny little bits, stick it on something like a slide or a tiny glass sleeve. When I say a slide, we're talking about something the size of the microchips that you have in your computer. And then we are able to copy up those bits of DNA and sequence all of them all at the same time. And so every single little bit of fragment gets sequenced all in one go. So you go from the beginning to the end and you've sequenced everything. And then of course you just give it to the computer and say, okay, could you sort that out please? And these days our computers have so much power that they can assemble up to all of our genes. Our whole genome can be put together by the computer and we can sequence the whole lot together. So obviously this is enormously much faster. We can cope with much, much more DNA. And when the question is which of these many, many genes might be involved, we now have a technology that's kind of suited to working that out. So what's happened recently is we've started to get these kind of things, and this is an example from a place over in the States where they're offering genetic testing, but they're not offering a gene test, they're offering a test for 126 different genes all in one go. So this is a place called Emory, which is a big university in the States, and this list here is basically every gene that they can think of that might cause a neuromuscular problem that's been published somewhere or someone's described. And so they stick them all together and you send your DNA into these guys and they do one gene test and cover the whole lot. So this is obviously a lot more powerful than anything we've had before, but of course there's lots of problems with that, and if you're looking at our DNA, all of us have a lot of variation. Around the room you can see that we've got a lot of variation in our genes because we look very different, and when we do this kind of testing we see a lot of that variation. So these days the problem isn't so much as doing the gene test, the problem is understanding what that means when you get the information back. So we spend a lot of our time working through this kind of data now thinking, is that important, is it not important, is this what I was looking for, or is this just part of the normal variation? We can't complain too much though, because we're clearly a lot better off than we used to be. So this is what people talk about when they talk about massively parallel sequencing, all the DNA sequenced all together at the same time, and we've gone from the situation where back in the year 2000, ended up being 2004, when the first whole human genome from start to finish was sequenced, they estimated that cost around $4 or $5 billion to do, and at least $150 million just in the final sequencing. These days, if we want to do a whole genome, we can probably get it done for less than $5,000 these days. And just to do the genes that we're interested in, you can get tests that cover hundreds of genes and cost somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. And those are starting to be quite widely available even here in Australia. And so, whereas before we had to scratch our heads and go one gene at a time, now we can answer these kind of questions, and that makes a big difference to us. But it raises a legitimate question: why does it matter? Why do you need to know the name of your gene? Is it important, or is it just a little bit of stamp collecting where you can say, oh yeah, I know the name of my gene, it's such and such? Does it actually make any difference to you? Well, I think it's important, and there's a few reasons why I think it's important. One is that these days, knowing the exact diagnosis means understanding it down to the gene level. So a lot of these conditions, which look quite similar, they behave a bit differently depending on which is the gene involved. So if we want to be able to tell somebody exactly how we think this might behave, it really helps that we know actually what the gene is. And in some cases, it's even actually what the variant in the gene is. You can have variants which are relatively mild, or variants associated with relatively severe disease, and sometimes we can actually go right down to that level and say, this particular variant you've got, it causes these features, and its progress is very slow, or sometimes its progress is quite rapid. And it's the kind of information that people really want to know. And so it does provide that kind of useful information for you as an individual with a particular condition. Of course, the other really big deal is it tells us about how it might work in a family. Neurogenic conditions are all about the genetic aspect. They're all about the fact that they tend to run in families. The inheritance can be different. Sometimes the risks are high, sometimes the risks for other family members are quite low. And if we know what the gene is, then we can work that out in a lot of detail. And a lot of the time we can actually offer a test to other people to find out whether or not this is going to be important. And for guys in your age group, obviously the big question is about thinking about future family. How might this impact on family that you haven't had yet, but which you might have in the future? And if we know the particular gene, then that provides options in that area that we wouldn't have otherwise. From the science point of view, knowing what these different genes are helps us to understand the big concepts like why is this happening at all? Why are these genes important? What's common about these different genes that seem to cause the same problem? What is that trying to tell us about the way that our nervous system works? And eventually we hope that points us the way to treatments and to interventions that we can do in the future that will manage these things a lot better. Is that realistic? So we spend a lot, I don't know how long I've been doing this now, too long, thankfully, but at least a decade or so. And we've been talking about treatment the whole time. And one of the frustrating things is, of course, in medicine, treatments take a very long time to come through. And so even after you get these big papers that get into the newspaper and people say they've got a cure for this or a cure for that or a new drug that fixes breast cancer or does this or does that, it's years before we tend to see it actually in the clinic. It's a long time before we actually have that treatment available to us. So how realistic is it? Is that just pipe dreams that maybe one day these things will turn into new treatment opportunities, or is something actually going on at the moment? Well, the good news for neurogenetics is that there's a stack of stuff that is actually going on right now, which will turn into really important advances in the near future. So this is just an example. Again, this is using stuff from the guys in the laboratory, and this is just to show something that came out of work that we were doing that was completely unexpected. So what you're looking at here, this is a nerve cell growing on a plate in a tissue culture. So it's actually from a mouse, but we've taken it out of the mouse, which is unfortunate for the mouse, obviously. And now it's growing in the tissue culture plate. And we've put a protein into it, which is one of these proteins which we know is a gene that's involved in a neurodegenerative disorder. And then we introduced the mutation that a family has in it, and this is a mutation that causes the condition Charcot-Marie tooth. And we found that suddenly that protein, instead of travelling all through the nerve in the normal way, started to clump into little clumps inside the cell, which is obviously something which is not going to work very well for the cell. If instead of this protein moving all around doing its job, it was forming little clumps in the cell and not doing its job at all. And then when we looked at totally different genes, so this is a totally different gene, another mutation from another family, we found that this was actually a common pattern, that a lot of the proteins, when you introduced the mutation that was found in families into this kind of setting, the protein suddenly started clumping. You can see the same thing here, little dots instead of a nice smooth background. And the same, this is a totally different gene, two different mutations causing exactly the same thing, clumping of the proteins. Now, this wasn't something that people had suggested. People were looking at these genes saying, well, what do these genes do that's so important for nerve cells that you can't not have one working? Well, it turned out that wasn't the story at all. It wasn't about what the gene did. It was about what happened when you introduced the mutation, and then they started clumping together. So a completely unexpected finding, which opens up a whole new way of looking at these genes and potentially whole new treatments. So if we could now find a treatment that stopped proteins clumping together, instead of focusing on the function of the gene, then you potentially got something that you could actually work with and could turn into a treatment. So knowing about the genes and the mutations does turn out to be really important. But even then, that's not very practical. So here's something that really should get people excited. This is actually from an article that was published just a month ago, so the 8th of August this year. And this is about the condition spinomuscular atrophy. So just to guide you through what you're looking here, this picture here is a picture. In this picture, there are actually muscle cells and the nerves coming down and touching the muscle cells to pass on the signal to act. You can't see the muscle cells because they're all black, but the nerve cells have been highlighted in green here by labelling with a protein. And what's happening here is, on the muscle cells, there's a little red patch where the nerve has to touch. And so you can see the green nerve is coming down and touching the red patch. And when they lie on top of each other, what you get is the red patch on the muscle cell, the green nerve, and when they lie on top of each other, it makes it look yellow. So here, this is normal. This is a healthy mouse with its nerves coming down and touching on the muscle, sending the signal. This is a mouse that has the mouse version of spinal muscular atrophy, and you can see there's not many nerves now, and instead there's lots of these red patches which are bare. They don't have the nerve coming down and touching them because the nerve has died back, leaving the exposed muscle which no longer has a nerve, and so it doesn't work anymore. So this is what spinal muscular atrophy looks like in a mouse. Then what they did is they found this compound through knowing what the gene does and knowing how it works at a genetic level. They screened a lot of compounds that they thought might fix that, and they've come up with one here, and you can see this is the same mouse with mouse spinal muscular atrophy, but now they've treated it with this compound, and you can see all those bare red patches are now yellow again, and they're all back to having their nerves, and they're overlying them so that the nerves are back to touching the muscles again. And you can even see that in the mice down here. This is a normal healthy mouse. This is the mouse with the mouse version of spinal muscular atrophy, and you can see over here, this shows you the lifespan of the mouse, and you can, that red line there shows them all dying by about day 20. It doesn't look like a very healthy mouse. You can imagine this mouse is not going very far. This is the same mouse with mouse spinal muscular atrophy now treated with that compound, And over here you can see these mice surviving, depending on the dose, that's a little bit, a bit more, and that's a lot. And you can see that they're surviving for a long time. And this compound, this, for the first time ever, seems to be something which actually fixes spinal muscular atrophy. So a genetic disorder that the mouse is born with, but you give them a compound after birth, so you can wait till they've actually been born and they're showing signs of the symptoms of the condition, give them this compound and it reverses the condition. This is a really amazing piece of work that is quite different to anything we've seen in certainly in spinal muscular atrophy before. The nice thing about this is, you might say, oh, well, isn't that the same old story? We found this in mouse, we can expect sort of in 10 years' time we might hear about this drug potentially being used. But in fact, these guys really understand how important this is. They've already done the test that shows that this is safe in humans, so they've done what they call the phase 1 trial to show that it's okay to give this compound to humans. And in fact, they're already onto the phase 2 testing, trying to treat spinal muscular atrophy in people with this compound. So this is an example of a really beautiful example of how a genetic problem goes to work in the laboratory, goes to a discovery that can be then converted into a treatment. And this is exactly why I think we're in a very lucky time at the moment, because a lot of these things are coming through. The technology has reached the point where we are really starting to convert these into actually useful treatment. The other thing that people ask me a lot about in terms of treatment is stem cells. In fact, I think it's probably the most common question I get at the end of after talking about all the neurogenetic stuff. I try and leave it out because stem cells are complicated and what about stem cells? So what about stem cells? Are they a real thing? We've been talking about them for quite a while. Is it going to be like gene therapy, which has been around for 20 years and still isn't usable? No, in fact, stem cells look like they are really very exciting. So the reason that stem cells are exciting these days is once upon a time stem cells, which are these parts of these cells in our body, well, in fact they originally occur when we're little embryos, they are the cells that can turn into any part of our body. So one of the things about our nervous system is that once it's made, when you're developing as an embryo, you don't make it anymore. You make it once and that's it. The cells don't divide and there's no more progress. So if you lose a nerve cell, you don't make another one, you just lose it. Stem cells are the cells that can come along and turn into any part of our body, including those parts of our body that we don't normally regenerate. So you can regenerate liver cells, you can regenerate blood cells, but those are all fine because most of the time we're making new ones of those. What would be really important would be if we could regenerate nerve cells, because normally we don't make any more of those. In about 2000, it started off, stem cells were limited by the fact you could only get them from embryos, and it made it very difficult in America. Of course, they weren't prepared to look at that at all. But in 2006, somebody showed that you could take a normal human cell, treat it in the laboratory, and turn it back into a stem cell. So we could take a sample of our skin, take it to the laboratory and make it back into a stem cell. And it's not just any stem cell, it's our stem cell. So it's a stem cell that is genetically the same as you. It was such a big breakthrough, the guy won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, and that was 2006, 2012. That's very fast for a Nobel Prize, so everyone thought this was important. It's important for two reasons. One is that you can create these models of what it's like for a human to have a particular condition. So you can create a stem cell which behaves like, for instance, a nerve that contains a mutation for a particular condition, and then you can look at what treatments might affect that. And that's very exciting. It's going to help treatment a lot. But of course, that's not what we really want to do. What we really want to do is turn it into your own nerves and then give them back to you. And that sounds like it really might be, science fiction. Surely that's not feasible. But in fact, there's been some really exciting stuff just recently. And this is just to show you a paper that was published not too long ago. What you're looking at here is, again, some more nerves growing in culture. But this time, these are not nerve cells from some poor unfortunate mouse. What's happened here is they've taken a skin sample from somebody with the condition Huntington's disease, which is a neurodegenerative condition that causes dementia, and they've taken the cells, they've fixed the genetic problem so that they're just the same as the patient's cells, but now they don't have the genetic mutation anymore, and then they've encouraged them to turn into nerve cells and start growing like nerves. So here they have, in culture, grown nerve cells from that person with Huntington's disease, except these nerve cells don't have Huntington's anymore. It's true that these are growing in culture, they're not growing in the person, but this is still an incredible breakthrough to imagine that you could take something from somebody, fix the genetic problem, and then give it back to them, and it would be their own cell. And it's is exactly what, when people say to us, well, can you fix a genetic problem? I think that this is what they're talking about, and so hopefully we're not that far away from being able to say, yeah, actually, we could fix that. So it's a very exciting time. Stem cell therapy is something that's realistic. It's realistic in our time frame. I mentioned before, gene therapy has been quite disappointing. It's been a couple of decades and it hasn't really gone anywhere. In contrast, the first stem cell human trial is starting in Japan this year, or probably has started already, and that's a trial on a condition where there's slow loss of the nerve cells in the back of the eye, in the retina. And so it's actually, the very first thing they're using it for is actually pretty much a neurodegenerative condition. And so if that's successful, if they can show that they can get these stem cells to grow back into the back of the eye, into the nerve layer in the eye, then I think that's where, the prospect for this kind of technology is incredible. And we're bound to see a lot more trials of this, and I think it's very hopeful that we'll actually see this kind of thing. I'm very hopeful that I'll be around to see this kind of thing being used in practice. So, oops. It's the pictures that's making it so. So just to sum up, not to take up too much time, what I've tried to show you here, in terms of what's new in neurogenetics, is that there's a lot going on, and I think that's the message that I want people to take away, is that there is a lot of things that are happening. It's a really good time to be in this area, because I think we are going to see a lot of progress in the near future. I've shown you that we're learning a lot about the genetics, and that's been helped by this big breakthrough in genetic technology. And I've shown you that there's also real prospects for the first time of proper treatments in the near future that have really changed this whole field completely. I'll stop there because I know you've got lots of other things to talk about, but if anyone wanted to ask any questions about that, I'd be really happy to answer.
Now, questions now, or questions now?
Yeah, no, anytime you like.
I suppose, so are they looking to bring that into Australia, maybe testing on people? What are you thinking?
I should imagine that as soon as these trials get going, that we'll be lining up to, people will be queuing up to be part of these trials because it's such an exciting area. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine down in Monash that there's a whole building which is devoted to stem cell research at Monash University. I can't imagine that they'll be able to hold us back as soon as these things start going. So yeah, I think we will see it here in Australia. We're actually quite lucky where we've moved further in Australia than perhaps in the United States because of those issues that they had initially about stem cell research. And so we're perhaps even better off than a lot of places to take advantage of this when it comes along.
That's exciting.
Thank you, Paul. If anybody's got any questions in the future through the website, we might be able to get those questions to you and get them answered. And I'm thinking, Paul, with your permission, some of this information would be great to go on the website as well. So we might work on that after tonight.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay?
I stole most of it from websites.
Oh.
So
We'll put a version of that up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. So really, now we're going to be listening to Hannah, who's really the very reason why we're all here this evening. So she's the driver behind this idea. So Hannah, I'm sure that you've got a lot to say, and so with permission from everybody in the room, this is about neuromuscular support for young people like you. So welcome. Thank you.
Did you want me to stay right here or stand? Or
You need to, if you could stand where Paul was standing.
the microphone.
Oh,
okay, sure. Okay. I'm going to try and talk very slowly because I speak very quickly normally, and I'll be done in like 3 minutes otherwise. So, hi, I'm Hannah. I'm Hannah Pennington. I'm 25 years old, and I'm here this evening to talk to you about my experience as an adult living with a neuromuscular condition. I'm sorry if I get emotional. I've been. Oh my god. So I began experiencing differences and noticing changes and relating to even just performing daily tasks when I was about 18 years old. Probably the most noticeable was picking myself up off the ground. It was very painful and very awkward. Running, it was really awkward and difficult to run. General exercise was also really difficult. And maintaining balance became a real struggle. And I began noticing a lack of strength in my hands and legs especially. So at the time, without not really knowing what was going on, I self-diagnosed myself as being lazy and overweight, which was probably true as well. So during the next few years, I saw a chiropractor for my back and pelvic discomfort that started to happen as well. I also lost some weight, but on the contrary, didn't seem to make life any easier for me. In fact, I probably lost some of the little muscle which I did have left in my legs and arms, and was noticeably weaker than before as well. I would avoid anything social which I knew would require physical effort, stairs, and also carrying anything heavy. So I just sort of, stopped doing stuff that I made a decision. I sort of made the decision to not let anyone see what was going on. So it was probably in about 2012 that I knew something wasn't right with my body. It was probably more than just, being lazy. So I booked in to see a physio, who was this really lovely, nice young woman who was pretty new to being a physio. And she gave me a look once over, and I remember precisely the words that she used was, "It's not normal for a 23-year-old to not be able to go to the floor," and I knew that she was right. So that same day, she referred me to a neurologist and gave me some tips to help me sleep, because sleeping was also really difficult and still is really difficult. It's just lots of tossing and turning, just lots of discomfort. So I was booked in to see a neurologist at Royal Melbourne, and this particular doctor undertook some basic tests and looked over my body. He said that we would need to go ahead and have some nerve and muscular tests done. And it was then that I was told that I could potentially have a neuromuscular condition. So prior to that, I had no idea. I wasn't really familiar. I remember one day actually, during this whole stage that I was, in self-diagnosis, and I thought I was lazy and overweight, I joined a gym, and when you join a free gym, you get a free personal trainer session. And I remember the personal trainer asking if I had spinal muscular atrophy, and I had no idea what it was. And then I later Googled it and was sort of like, oh my god, that sounds exactly like what's going on with my body. So a few months after that, I had a nerve conduction study. So I had really thin needles inserted into various places on my body, and electronic currents shocked me as the functioning of my nerves was tested. So after these tests were done, my neurologist said that he couldn't exactly pinpoint the condition, but it was more than likely a form of spinal muscular atrophy. So I went from, knowing that I could potentially have a neuromuscular condition to having spinal muscular atrophy. So at the time, the news was pretty devastating. And I suppose the first thing that I became largely concerned with, and probably still remains to be so now, was the future. All I could think about was the future and what was going to happen and all these questions. I sort of, because I suppose I had been feeling the same way for such a long time, but my present situation, I had managed it to the point where I didn't really have to tell anyone that, there was anything going on with me. I didn't probably, physically let on in a huge way that there was something going on, so it was really well hidden. But, you know, I thought if this is something that's going to get worse, then obviously, you know, I'm going to have to think, you know, about my future. And so that sort of was probably my first biggest concern. So I just wrote down a few of the questions that I probably immediately grew really concerned about, and still I still think about every single day. So I thought, you know, how long is it going to be until I can't walk anymore and I need to be in a wheelchair? How am I going to cope with having children? Will they get whatever I have? You know, are they going to get my condition? Am I going to have to depend on a carer for the rest of my life? How will this affect my family? Sorry. And my relationships. Who do I need to explain this to? Who do I need to explain this to, and how can I do that without having a conclusive diagnosis? So, sorry. Gross. So my particular condition is unable to be really defined. So I don't have a name. You know, I don't have a particular a name. It's not even definitely spinal muscular atrophy, because I had my DNA sent to be tested, just like how we saw before, to discover and diagnose what particular neuromuscular condition I had. And in early July this year, I was told that there was no genetic abnormalities associated with spinal muscular atrophy. So no genes associated with the disease could be identified in me. So, you know, I'm unsure of the name or type of neurological disorder which I have. I'm working hard to not let it define who I am. All I know is how I feel physically and mentally on a day-to-day basis, which is tired and weak. But, ending on a happy note, with the incredible support constantly from my mum and dad, my entire family, you guys, my friends, Adrian, I'm trying to continue to remain as positive as possible, and, you know, do stuff like this to create awareness of adults living with neuromuscular conditions who don't, you know, get the support that they require. So a way of doing this is just sharing my experience and hopefully getting less emotional about it every time. And that's it. So thank you. Sorry for crying a few times. That was really hard, you guys.
Thank you, Hannah. And it's okay to get emotional when you talk about your journey. There's a lot of young people that find it very hard to articulate what they've experienced and what they think they might experience in the future, because the future is just as difficult, and thoughts and all those sorts of things. But today really is the start of, you know, and today's the first day of the rest of your life. So with the support of everybody in this room, I think it's not only brave, but it's just a wonderful thing that you're prepared to share what you're going through. And you know, if we encourage other young people to do the same thing, if we just have one conversation that makes someone feel better about their journey, then we've done a great job. So power to you for doing that. And there is no embarrassment here, because everybody in this room is here to support people like you. So we're all trained to see it, to know that it's hard, and the frustration from the professional side is that we can't do things quickly, and that we can't always give you exactly what you need in terms of supporting you every day. But there is a concerted effort to do that. So thank you. Adrian, got some things to share with us this evening, and then after Adrian does her little talk, we'll just open up for extra questions or discussion, and we might just walk out of here with a couple of ideas of how we can take tonight and progress this idea of a support group, because a little bit of feedback would be fantastic.
reasons it's not about anyone who comes to the Royal Melbourne Clinic, that I have hopefully borrowed stories from people who've posted their experiences on support group websites around the world and in Australia. Although there's a lot of different types of neuromuscular conditions, it's the experiences of people with those conditions often share a lot of things. So, for example, Gail from the FSHDglobal.org website, that's Facioscapular Muscular Dystrophy, she says, I did begin to think something was wrong when I could no longer climb a large step. When I tried to run, I felt this terrible weakness in my legs, and I just couldn't make them do what I wanted. I'd be walking, put my foot down, and instead of taking my weight, my leg gave way and there was nothing I could do. I knew I was falling, but I didn't have the strength to stop the fall. It was a terrible feeling collapsing on the footpath of the road and the underground footpath. A lot of people have similar stories. Being diagnosed with this type of condition is often coming at a time when there's a lot else that's going on. That might be things like moving out of home, building more self-confidence and own identity, finding new social groups and building a career path, and also forming longer-term relationships. And for many people, this type of neuromuscular problems, the pathway to diagnosis can really disrupt a lot of those things that would normally be going on, and it really changes the outlook for the future. Kelly from the YoungParkinsons.org website was diagnosed at 29, and she says, my appointment with the neurologist made me feel like a privilege when I went on Cheerios. We ran a series of movement-based tests, and to my surprise, I failed each and every test. My hand after 3 and 4 open closes stopped moving. My right foot had lost the ability to tap. And when I was asked to lie down with my arms out to my side and move my arm off the floor, I simply couldn't do it. I was shocked. How can so much have changed without me knowing? How long had this been going on? My best guess now is 2 or 3 years before diagnosis, or maybe longer. And several appointments later, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I was 29. It's kind of funny how many times in your daily life do you need to touch a thumb to each finger only to realise that you can't do that, and that will lead you to a life-changing diagnosis, probably never. That's a little bit, she's talking about the neurology appointments and all the different things that the neurologists get people to do. And as Paul said, finding an exact cause or a genetic diagnosis often isn't possible. But the uncertainty of not having a diagnosis can be really difficult because it's hard to know what the prognosis is, it's hard to plan for the future. But on the other hand, not having that label means that there's no extra limitations that come with the label. So it can be difficult either way. But even if an exact cause is found, there's still often a lot of uncertainty. That's because these conditions are so variable from person to person. And that can even be with the same condition within the same family. Different people can get symptoms at different ages and different severities. However, an exact diagnosis can tell you information about the chances that children could inherit that may be anything from 50% to almost 0 chance, depending on the gene, and it can also tell you information that's relevant for your relatives. As I said, it can really change the outlook that people have for the future, and neuromuscular condition is part of it, but it does not define your things of that too. It can lead to low self-esteem, and that's really common for people with neuromuscular conditions. Self-consciousness worries are common, and it's really important to seek help for any difficulties like depression or anxiety or apathy that just come along from having these types of symptoms. However, over time, many people do find it possible to change eventually from thinking about the things that I can't do and changing to thinking about what changes can I make so that I can do the things that I want to do. That's really hard. It does take a home, often people in your family might be unsure about whether it's okay to talk about those types of things, whether to become more involved or less involved. So some strategies are to make some time for the family to talk directly, to tell your family what would work for you. Do you want them to be more or less involved? And also to acknowledge their concerns. Flexibility is important as well because in any family, things change over time, and that's going to happen. So weighing up the pros and cons of living at home or moving out can be really difficult, and that's to do with mobility, financial issues, and transport, all sorts of things that can make it really complex. It can be benefits to both. It's normal for any young adult with or without a disability to have some worries about dating and relationships. There's some challenges that people with neuromuscular conditions, particularly those which are not immediately obvious, can be about when to tell someone on the first date, or when it becomes a bit more serious, or perhaps to wait until starting a family, and we have questions about whether the condition will affect physical relationships. So some strategies are to think beforehand about what to say, when would you say that, how would you say that, to talk with a friend or a counsellor about it, and especially if it's preventing you or making you reluctant to start in relationships. And GPs and psychologists can help with issues about intimacy. At work and socially, it's very common to feel unsure about whether to tell others about a medical condition. There's no real need to do that, but it is good to think about whether it would be helpful for you if other people knew or not. Some strategies are to talk with other people who have this type of conditions about how they deal with reactions from strangers or friends or colleagues. And to talk, again, just talking with someone about that will help. If friends don't know, is that making your social life quite stressful, hiding that every time you go out, or trying to avoid particular activities that take up a lot of physical and mental energy? On the other hand, if that works for some people, so that's good. Support is there if you need it. So firstly, talk with others via this group. We're hoping to have monthly meetups perhaps at the Children's Hospital, or you can contact Hannah directly. Also, GPs with source of support, as well as medical specialists, genetic counsellors, the Genetic Support Network, and there's a lot of community organisations like the Muscular Dystrophy Association, which may not be exactly relevant for all different conditions, but they do have a lot of really useful information on their practical advice and fact sheets, things like that. There's a lot of really good online international groups as well. Other things that you could do are to remember to ask. So if you are having trouble with sleeping or depression or pain or anxiety, make sure you ask. Ask your doctor or ask someone. And if things around the house, some things are a bit more tricky than others, an occupational therapist can help. The GP can arrange that. And really just to do anything that helps you, because it might not be the same as it is for someone else. I'll just leave you with these words from Christopher and Selma, posted on the Muscular Dystrophy website, quest.mta.org. He says, I was already 17 when I was diagnosed with myopathy, which involves weakness of the limbs and the lower extremities, especially the calves. They can progress to other muscles as well. My life changed a great deal from where I thought I'd be at 27. I've learned so much during this time, which has helped me stay afloat as I become increasingly disabled. So he says, excuse me, to figure out what disability will never take away. With a late onset disease, you lose the ability to do many things: run, lift heavy objects, climb stairs, eventually even walk. It's impossible not to dwell on what you've lost. But my biggest regret looking back is wasting time lamenting what I was no longer able to do. Things only began to turn around for me when I took an afternoon and wrote a list of what I could still do. I can love, I can laugh, important too, he says, to find ways to reduce stress, because as you navigate this new reality, you might feel anger, frustration, depression, your body will be sore and stiff, and all of this can lead to a lot of stress. One stress reliever that works for me is writing and helps to express the feelings. But whatever helps you to relax, do it. Write, paint, read, do yoga, find any activity that can make you calm and do it as often as possible. When our mind and body feel well, it's much easier to tackle day-to-day challenges. I've just got a list of other links that you might find interesting. We can put those up on the website afterwards.
What I found really interesting about your talk, Adrian, is that you could have been talking about any or many conditions. And so what is really important in terms of understanding support for people with genetic conditions and complex conditions is that often the experiences are very, very similar. So if you take away the differences or the particular condition, but you look at the effect on life and outcomes in life, the experiences are very, very similar. So we can learn from where other groups have gone and what they've established to do. But what's really important, I think, in terms of complex conditions where we don't have a lot of answers, is that very line of let's concentrate on what we can do and what is still what we're still able to do, and make sure and work towards keeping that as preserved as long as possible. And that can be from a mindset, and it can be from a physical health and a medical model assistance project as well. So I find that if I just close my eyes and I listen to people talk, they could be talking about any condition. It's a very, very similar spectrum, and it changes. So we talked about family assistance and family dynamics, siblings, parents, helping young people navigate life with a complex condition. Their responses, their involvement, their feelings around it as well can change. So it is a spectrum, and we need to be really flexible. I think that was a really good point. And if we could predict the future, then we'd be able to put things in place and plan, but we can't. So we have to use all of our human resources and natural responses and our value systems and everything that we've got to just say we would do our very best on any given day. And that's just general advice for anyone that's going through this. So with my team, and Robin can probably corroborate this, that the professional advice is to communicate as much as possible and to try and work through these things. So in setting up neuromuscular support for young people, this is a really great place to start. And Adrian, I'd love to put all that on the website. But I'd like to really challenge all of you that have been very generous with your time and come out tonight, and help Hannah and the Genetic Support Network and Adrian, who's been instrumental in getting this off the ground, help us get some concrete things together that will move this support group forward. And maybe we can have just some emails from you with some thoughts from tonight, even if it's one line. I thought about this when I left the room, or I think that this would be a good idea. So can I invite you to post that to, I don't know if you all remember, but perhaps Hannah, you remember this, so the info@gsnv.org.au email address.
Yep.
If everyone in this room, I'm opening it up to you to just give us a little bit of feedback, a thought on how we move forward in supporting young people like Hannah, because we can anticipate what the needs are, but really this is about everybody engaged. This is all the stakeholders, the patient themselves, the family, siblings, even the little one who might, might see certain things around Hannah, and and the professionals, and then those that like us that are charged to help put together some support. So we've still got a long way to go, but I think it was a really great opportunity tonight as well. And the stories that people give us around their experience with narrative that we need to put out there to create awareness. That's what, you know, the medical system needs to hear. And I wish I could have a lot more professionals in the room when we do sessions like this, because they don't forget, but it does remind them of the true human, non-medical story behind it. It's not just about science, and it's not just about medicine. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Adrian.
Louisa, people can post on the forum as well, on the website.
Yeah, so we're going to put this online, and what we might do in the next week with Nancy, who's our IT guru in the office, we might create an area where perhaps you could put, you can send an email, just so we can get the feedback and then put it online. We probably will put a date where we'll do like a forum, so that is that questions can be posted and then we'll get them answered. And Adrian, I'm counting on you for a bit of that.
Okay.
But if you just go to the website, we'll put that information up in the next week or so. And any suggestions as well, you can just email us. So thank you, everybody. As you leave this room, you can go out the glass doors and then down the stairs and then just out through the main entrance. So hopefully the doors will be open and we can get through. And we hope to see more of you in the future as we progress support for neuromuscular conditions. So thank you. Hannah, did you want to say anything before we go?
Yeah, and Adrian is the best, and she's, yeah, this is her baby too.